Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the November Color Kitz collection from Shimmerz. I'm starting out this layout with one of the pattern papers from the kit, and I'm using a brand new product from Shimmerz. This is a clear gesso, and I'm putting a little dab on each of the branches and spreading it around with my paintbrush. What I like about this particular clear gesso is that it's not grainy like some of the clear gessos that I've used, so I really liked that about it. And even though the Color Kitz collection comes with lots of great colors, I was very excited to use another new product from Shimmerz. These are the Twinklingz. They are very, very shimmery watercolors that Shimmerz has created, and they have them in their new little pans. So I thought that I would try these out on coloring these leaves. I don't usually use clear gesso when I'm either painting in pattern papers like this or on watercolor paper. Those are two different papers that I use my Shimmerz paints on a lot. But I was experimenting with this gesso on some leaves that I made out of watercolor paper, and I covered just one of them with this clear gesso. And then after I was all done painting all of my leaves and they were all dry, I found that the leaf that I put the gesso on was just a little bit more vibrant because the paper, I guess, wasn't able to soak up the color. So I thought that I would give it a try on this pattern paper. I love experimenting with different papers and different mediums and different paints. You can get so many different effects. So for this paper, my plan is to fussy cut out all of these leaves, but I wanted to paint them first. I started off with a Twinklingz called Plant One On Me, and I painted all of that same style of leaf with that color. And then I went back in with some Mind Your Beesness. That's the yellow color that you see there. I layered the yellow paint on top of the green leaves, and I also used it on top of the orange leaves. And the color that I use for those orange leaves is Rustic Charm. I'm also using another Twinklingz called Blue Bayou. And then I'm trying to paint all of the leaves that are the same style with the same color scheme. I'm going to go back into those blue leaves in a little while with a Twinklingz that's called Once Upon a Wine. I really love the combination of the blue and the purple. I think those turned out to be my favorite leaves. And this is where I begin layering the yellow on top of that rusty color just to give it a little bit more interest. So something exciting that Shimmerz did recently was they had a giveaway. I had a video on my channel all about Twinklingz. And the giveaway was for a gift certificate to the Shimmerz shop. And I have notified the winner, but I just wanted to announce it here. Betty Lou Smathers, she is the winner of the Shimmerz gift certificate. Betty Lou, if you're listening, if you could please email me. I have my email in the description box, and let me know what the best email is for you. And then I'll pass your email along to Shimmerz Paints, and they'll make sure you get your gift certificate. And like many of the wonderful people who watch my channel, Betty Lou always leaves me a really sweet comment, and I'm really happy for her that she was the winner of this gift certificate. After I had finished painting the purple and blue branches, I put this pattern paper aside and I allowed it to thoroughly dry before I attempted to fussy cut out all of the branches. And you will see those branches in a little while because I'm going to use many of them on this layout. So, of course, I want to create a mixed media background. And for the mixed media background, I'm using the colors that were included in the color kits. To make my mixed media background, I'm using my usual paper. It's 120-pound smooth white cardstock. I've added a coating of Liquitex gesso to it. I'm starting the background off with a Vibez called Pumpkin Pie. I'm using my favorite packaging technique to spread the color around. I like to use a small piece of plastic. I think that it's much easier to manage than a larger one. A lot of times I'll start with a big one, then I'll start cutting it into smaller pieces. I know that I want to have my photo over on the left-hand side of the layout. I didn't want to make the color go too high on the paper, although I do change my mind about that. And I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do toward the bottom of the layout, but I know that I want to include a lot of flowers and leaves and branches on this layout. So I was thinking that I probably wanted to have a lot of color in the background because those embellishments might cover up some of the mixed media. So I periodically use my heat tool to dry the paint, and then I add another layer of paint on top. Here I'm using another paint from the November kit. It's a Shimmerz called Here I Am. I put a little bit of it on a piece of plastic, and then I add a little bit of water to help to move it around the page. And while it's still an orangey shade, I like the way it was different from the pumpkin pie so that there would be a little bit of variation in my background. And I honestly forgot that I had done that on this layout. You could see here I did cut my piece of plastic into a smaller piece, and that just helps me to manipulate the color a little bit better, like I said. So I continue to add layers of color and use my heat tool to dry the paint. Of course, I'm not so worried about that bare spot in the middle because I know that my photo is going to go there. So I'm really just concentrating on the outside of that kind of triangular shape that I made. And I'm removing the paint from the top now, but later on I am going to add more paint up there, and the paint goes almost to the top of the page. I feel like I always start off by making the mixed media background too small on the page, and then I often have to go in and make it larger, which is probably better than making it too large to begin with, because it's a lot easier to make it larger than to make it smaller. And on this layout, I use lots and lots of embellishments, so I do need to have quite a bit of color in the background, so you'll be able to see some of it kind of peeking through between all of the embellishments. I know I also want to create a small cluster in the top right-hand corner. I always feel like those smaller clusters kind of balance off the larger ones, so now I'm expanding the color to that area. And a little while ago, you saw that I added some splatters of the pumpkin pie, and I mainly concentrated those around the outside of the area of color. And now I'm adding more splatters because I like to have lots and lots of splatters on my backgrounds. So after I added quite a few of those orange splatters, I was thinking that I wanted to add another color to the background, although I wasn't sure that I would like it, but I was happy with it. I ended up adding some splatters of Coloringz from, again, the November kit called Ready or Not, and I think that it wasn't so different that the color stood out too much. I think it kind of went along with the orange, but it was a little bit different, and I think added some nice variation to that background. And one of the nice things is that for these kits, Shimmerz Paints will create a color palette that you can rely on to all go together. So I don't really have to think too much about which colors are going to match. And I like that. I think that it makes the creation process a little bit easier. So after I added a couple of those splatters of that reddish color, I went back in again with more of the pumpkin pie and added more splatters. And you could see that I'm just going to town, adding some orange, adding some red, and I really love the combination. For the most recent round of those orange splatters, I used a small paintbrush, and that creates some smaller splatters. And then for the reddish color, I wanted the splatters to be a little bit larger. So I used my finger and I tapped on the base of the straw that's inside of the paint, and that makes some larger splatters. I allowed the background to dry thoroughly, and then I thought I could do a little bit of stamping on the background. I didn't want to use black because I thought it would be a little bit too dark considering all the other colors that I planned on using. So I used this archival ink in Vintage Photo, and I used some stamps that I have in my stash, and I added some stamping mainly to the outside of that large area where I have the color on the bottom, but in the middle as well. And then I added stamping to the smaller area of color at the top too. And although I really enjoy stamping on my backgrounds, you can't really see too much of this on the final product. There's a couple of spots where you could see the stamping, but I don't think it made a really big impact. On some layouts, the stamping makes a big difference. On this layout, I think it was the modeling paste that kind of transformed the background a little bit more. I don't know if this happens to you, but it happens to me frequently. I will get an idea, and then I will make a whole bunch of whatever that thing is that I got it in my head that I had to do. And that's what happened with stencils. I used my Silhouette Cameo and some plastic sheets, mainly report covers, and I cut out a whole bunch of stencils to add to my stash. And I use Silhouette cut files to make all of these stencils. Every now and then I'll want a particular type of stencil, so I'll make one, but this was the time that I used my Silhouette Cameo for a couple of days, cutting all the time. I made lots and lots of stencils. So I like this stencil because I like the way it has swirls in it, and I thought that would be a nice image to have over the top of this orangey color. The only problem with this stencil is that the modeling paste kept getting behind it, partially because I use this very flimsy material, and then also just because of the way the stencil was cut, there were a lot of areas that seemed to keep lifting up. However, despite the fact that I struggled a little bit with this stencil, I did like the final product because you can see the swirls and you can't see too much of the areas where I had some little accidents that I had to redo. And then after I was done applying the modeling paste, I went back in with a little bit more of that Coloringz Ready or Not, and I added some more splatters. And there's a die to the right-hand side of my layout. I'm not sure why I have it out in the midst of doing all this mixed media, but I do. And I was going to use that for the title for this layout, but I ended up doing something a little bit different that I think went better with this layout than that particular title. And now this is when I decided that I needed to make that orange background much larger. So I went back in and I made the mixed media portion of the background kind of a monstrosity. I didn't include all of the footage, but I did all of the same things that I did to make the first layer of the background, or the first portion of the background. And then after I had repeated the entire process for the part that I added on, I added some white splatters. I used some watered down white acrylic paint, and I added splatters all over the background, including the area at the top. Oh my goodness, I am finally done with my mixed media background now. I'm sure you're happy about that. And now I'm going to move on to a few other of the elements that I'm going to include on my layout. So I have this EK Success large scalloped punch, and every once in a while I'll use this on a layout, and I have to say I really do like this punch. I cut out a banner or a scallop from one of the pattern papers, and then I did the same thing with a piece of cardstock, and I'm going to put the cardstock scallop behind the pattern paper one, and this will help to have it contrast with the background. I was afraid that that pattern paper banner or scallop would get lost against all of the mixed media. And if you look to the right of my mat, you could see that I started off by cutting one out of kind of a rusty orange page, but that color was a little too similar to the background, and I thought that the green contrasted with it a little bit more. Now, this is the photo that I'm using. This is a photo of my daughter Danielle that was taken when we went apple picking quite a few years ago now. And this blue paper is another one of the pattern papers from the kit. I inked the edges, and then I attached it down to a piece of white cardstock just to make a little border on it. And then I had also added a thin border of white cardstock to the photo. And the ink that I'm using here is my standard ink. It is Distress ink in Vintage Photo. I attached that banner down to the background, and then I attached my photo on top of it, just slightly overlapping it. And then I started adding some of the many fussy cut and die cut pieces that I add to this layout. I use a whole bunch of sunflowers. Those were fussy cut out from one of the pattern papers. And then I'm also going to use those branches that I painted earlier in this video. I have fussy cut all of those out. And I'm also going to use some of the leaves that I made in an earlier video. That was the video in which I introduced Twinklingz, the watercolors that I used to paint the branches, again, earlier on in the video. And I'm going to incorporate a couple of the die cuts that were included in the kit too. So I have a lot of sunflowers on my layout, and I'm using some foam to pop some of them up. I wanted some of them to have a little bit of dimension and some of them to sit flat on the page. So I'm using fun foam to pop them up. And then I am inking the edges of all the sunflowers with that vintage photo distress ink. And if you look to the left of my mat, I have a whole bag of sunflowers, a whole bag of the leaves that I made with the Twinklingz, and then a whole bag of the die cuts that I made at the beginning of the video. And I probably have enough embellishments to use for several layouts. There were quite a few of those embellishments. I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to arrange the sunflowers until I found the embellishment you could see to the right of my mat. It's a rainbow. So I was thinking that I would be able to layer that in with those sunflowers just to kind of break up the idea of having so many flowers and branches and leaves. And I think that that did just the trick, and it also has such beautiful colors in it. And I don't show it on the video, but I have already tried placing that rainbow on top of the sunflowers that are toward the bottom of the layout, and I like the way that looked. But before I do that, I want to put all of the branches that I'm going to include on the layout. So I started off with the orange branches, and then I included some of the green ones, and now I'm going back in with my favorite ones. And I don't know if you can see just how beautiful these are. They have a lot of sparkle to them because I use the Twinklingz, but I also love the color combinations. I especially love, as I said earlier, the blue and the purple combination. And then the leaves that I'm using, those are the ones that I made in the video about Twinklingz. I just die cut these out from some watercolor paper, and then I use the Twinklingz paints to color them. Here you could see how the rainbow looks layered on top of the banner and the flowers that I have on the layout. I wanted to add some dimension to it, so I'm using some fun foam to pop it up. I had also considered using the ephemera piece that's on the right-hand side of my mat. It is a basket with lots of fruit in it. I liked that one as well, and I thought it went really nicely with the apple picking theme. But once I put that rainbow on there, I just knew that I was going to use that embellishment. I just loved it. So I always like to add photo corners. Since I have a lot of blue around the photo, I thought I would add some orange photo corners. So I used my EK Success scalloped photo corner punch that I use all the time. I inked the edges of the photo corners, and then I used ATG adhesive to attach them down. I slipped in another purple branch right by the photo. And then I decided that I was going to use these wood-grained thickers and spell out the word fall on my banner with one letter in each section of the banner. And I did not plan that before I thought of it toward the end of making the layout, but I just couldn't find any other title option that I liked. I always think it's a good idea to plan out your title before you are almost done with the layout, but luckily in this case, it all worked out. I added some pearls to the layout. I added some large green pearls in between each of the sections of the scalloped banner. And I had some green pearls on the photo corners, but then I found that I had this really pretty color of purple that I thought went really well with the purple branches that I have on the layout. So I decided to use those, and I was very happy with them. And then even though I have so many embellishments on this layout, I wanted to add a little bit of detail to the banner. So I added an orange leaf on either side of it. I also put a little squirrel into the cluster near the rainbow. Then I rearranged a couple of the leaves that were in that large cluster, and that is the very last thing that I do to the layout. And now it's complete, and here are a few close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed working with all of these embellishments and creating the mixed media background. It's my favorite thing about scrapbooking. The link to the Shimmerz shop is in the description box. If you make a purchase, please don't forget to use my name in the comments to receive a free gift. They are having a grab bag sale right now. I know you're going to want to check out. Thank you so much again for watching. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.